This last panel here, we've been very excited about as we ramp up the Bronze Buffalo Foundation and really where our mission meets our purpose here. And we have a mission of preserving Western legacy lands and lifestyle for future generations, and really with the end game and purpose of transforming lives and saving horses. And we have two of the finest gentlemen in the world to talk about this with us today. And it's a real honor and pleasure for me to be sitting on the same stand and to share a microphone with both of them. Before we jump into introductions, I think that most of you now here know Jose Alejos and have spent some time with Jose. I wanted to take a second to recognize the two fabulous people that brought Jose into this world, because if you haven't met them, they're sitting here. So Mom and Dad Alejos, would you stand up for a round of applause here?
Well, the retired low.
We are very grateful for the Alejos family, and you're truly part of our family. So thank you for being here. Second, we have Brian Yablonski. And Brian was introduced to Cody, my brother, the first time through Lee Perkins. Sadly, we miss Lee. Lee was a major part of the Bronze Buffalo Club in the building of the culture here. Lee was the chairman and CEO for many years of Orvis. He passed away this past year at over 90 years old. But the caveat to that is even within the last year of his passing, he was fishing and hunting 300 days a year. So that's our objective there. We would like to start off, and we're going to talk a little bit about conserving American lands and saving of the Mustang, and really talking a little bit broader than the Mustang when we jump into it with Jose. But Brian, you've had time to serve in the White House, run some of the major state organizations as it relates to conservation, and now you're the CEO of PERC, which when Lee made the introduction to Cody, there's a lot of different conservation organizations around the world. And Lee just couldn't talk highly enough about you and the things that PERC is doing. So with that, I'd like to ask Brian to talk a little bit about private lands and public lands, and maybe give us some framework around the American Mustang.
Thank you. Thanks, Justin. And first off, I want to thank Scott for the financial literacy message. The biggest news there is that I learned his name was Scott because I thought for the last 2 days Tom Brady was part of the Bronze Buffalo Club, and so you probably get that a lot. So, look what Justin and Cody and Lexi have created here. You know, I've sat here for the last 2 days. This is like a ideas amusement park for a guy who runs a research center and think tank. But you know, we've been talking about economic outlook. We've been talking about cybersecurity. We've been talking about COVID, real estate, but we haven't talked about this, where we are, like this setting, this spectacular land that we're in the middle of, and the wildlife that populates it. And so I think it's kind of fitting that we're gonna end the day here. Alan was talking earlier about sort of that near-death experience perspective in life. And all these other sessions have been great, but when I'm on my deathbed, I am not going to be thinking about cybersecurity or COVID. Hopefully at that time, I'll be thinking about some place in my mind where I've been that has been inspiring, or being on the back of a horse, or seeing a grizzly bear in the wild. And that gives you perspective. We're fortunate that Jose and I are fortunate we get to work with the outdoors and with wildlife and horses and things like that are truly grounded, I think, in what's important. So I live in Paradise Valley, Montana. It is the setting for Taylor Sheridan's Yellowstone. There's a story of a gentleman named Nelson Story, who was working the gold diggings up near Helena back in the 1860s. And he took his earnings and he went down to Texas and bought 1,000 head of cattle. And in 1864, he drove that 1,000 head of cattle up to Montana, went through and past the Bighorn Mountains during the middle of Red Cloud's War, didn't lose any cattle, didn't lose any 26 of his cowboys that he came up with. He got into Montana and was looking for a place to hold the cattle for the winter until he could start selling in the gold fields. And he picked Paradise Valley to hold those cattle. And today, the Story family still ranches Paradise Valley. So that's the place I come from. If that story sounds familiar, it was the basis for Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove and Taylor Sheridan's 1883. So there's some familiarity in that story. So I was gonna mention this because I'm really indebted to Cody and Justin for helping us do this. So I run a 42-year-old conservation research center that was founded by some outdoor loving economists for these guys. And one of them was a third generation cattle rancher from Eastern Montana, which doesn't sound impressive, but he's 80 years old and his grandfather started ranching Eastern Montana in 1892. And that's young compared to your forefathers, but we do have some ranching heritage. And, one of the things that when you're in Montana and you think about the TV show Yellowstone and you're in Montana, there's really two ways to look at it. One is it's sheer entertainment. People roll their eyes, there are explosions in Bozeman and all the violence and family dysfunction. Or if you're a more enlightened Montanan, you look at it as a way to educate folks who aren't familiar with that lifestyle. And our organization looks at it that way. I mean, Taylor, there was a comment about Taylor's authenticity. He has really hit on some real Western natural resource issues that aren't very familiar to the general public. Issues like weaponizing the Endangered Species Act or fence in, fence out policy. Who's responsible to keep cattle in, keep cattle out? Water rights. In the West here, we actually own water versus in the East where you don't own water. Stream access laws where you can, if you can walk up a stream, you can get into the middle of a ranch and fish legally. You're not trespassing as long as you came up the stream, and that causes all kinds of hardship between anglers and landowners, these big issues. And so Taylor's seized on all that. So we put together, with the help of Cody and Justin, a workshop last summer where we brought in some of the top scholars on Western natural resource issues and to look at scenes from Yellowstone, where he kind of dug into these storylines and to actually do a deeper dive on Western land policy. Taylor zoomed in for an hour and did a version of what he did today. I think Cody kind of did a good job of getting him to recreate that moment we did in Bozeman last year. And we had Luke Grimes, who plays Casey Dutton, thanks to Cody, come in person and actually sit in through the workshop. All that to say, out on the table there, we put all those papers and all that research into a journal here. So this is free for the taking out there. It is about Yellowstone, the television show, and do a deeper dive on some of those subplots. So what do I do? So PERC, we're not a coffee operation. We were something that was originally called the Political Economy Research Center, which only an economist could come up with a name like that. So for 30 years, we had this wonky economic name that, Paul knows what it means, but, it doesn't ooze environment or conservation or anything like that. So our board got together and said, well, what can we rename it? And we want to keep PERC. And then the idea came up to be protecting the environment through ruthless capitalism. And that held for like 30 minutes. And then the lawyers got involved and, okay. And so now we're the Property and Environment Research Center. And essentially the question is like, if markets and capitalism can create bread and cars, why can't it create environmental outcomes that are sustainable? So we advance a brand of environmentalism that's called free market environmentalism. If you know economics, economics is all about the study of incentives. Incentives matter. And there are negative incentives that are designed to punish. And oftentimes that's onerous regulation, that can be heavy-handed litigation, that can be laws that Congress passes, sort of a command and control approach that's going to beat you into submission. Or you can have positive incentives, and positive incentives actually reward you for doing conservation. Kind of a novel idea, but markets help you do that because they're cooperative. Property rights help you do that because you can exchange and trade property rights, innovation, entrepreneurship. So we really focus on the positive incentives to get conservation outcomes. I mean, one of the first things that we think of is that how can you make, for the people that we want to do the conserving, how can you make conservation an asset instead of a liability? How can we make conservation make economic sense for the folks who we want to do conserving? Think about the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act right now punishes you for having endangered species on your land, because what that does is invites regulation to come in from the federal government. And it leads to a shoot, shovel, shut up mentality in the West. And we got to undo that. The head of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under Barack Obama said, we have the incentives all wrong with the Endangered Species Act. If you find a piece of rare metal on your land, the value of your property goes up. But if you find a rare bird species on your land, the value of your property goes down. And so we have to fix that. So we look at ways to do that. We also think that capitalism should be not the enemy of the environment. We think it can be a solution for the environment at the end of the day. If you think about wealthy nations tend to support the environment more. There's something called the Kuznets curve in economics, where as a country is developing, there is environmental degradation. But it gets to a point where all of a sudden environment's not a luxury you can't afford. It's something you can afford. And then the curve goes down and you have environmental and conservation improvements. Wealthier nations tend to deploy more entrepreneurship and technology towards the environment. You tend to have wealthier individuals that give to organizations like Ducks Unlimited or the Nature Conservancy or Environmental Defense Fund, and it becomes a higher priority for government. And then finally, and this kind of takes us back to Taylor, is a respect for property rights is a big driver for what we do. Ownership is a powerful stewardship incentive if you give it a chance. I always ask the question, raise your hand if you ever go wash your rental car before you turn it in. No, you wash the car that you own. And that's the way landowners think and stewards think too. And so property rights is really manifested through private lands. And I want to talk a minute about private land and stewardship, why that's so important. Taylor was asked the question, why we need to keep these ranches and farms intact. And he had a really good answer about empires and food and everything. But I want to give you some statistics on ranches and farms as well, to give you another sense. Another reason why we need to keep these ranches and farms intact here is 71% of the continental United States is in private land. So we have 900 million acres of ranches and farms. We have about 400 million acres of private forests. 75% of all the wetlands are on private land. 80% of all the grasslands are on private land. 80% of the biological diversity hotspots are on private land. And 2/3 of the endangered species rely on private land for the majority of their habitat. So what we do on private land matters for wildlife, it matters for conservation, it matters for habitat. And Duke University recently did a study on rural attitudes and we've got this great divide between urban and rural America. But it turns out, I'm gonna be Captain Obvious here, but everyone in America agrees that we should conserve the environment. The only difference is rural folks care a lot about how it's done. Conservation is best when it's being done with landowners and not to landowners at the end of the day. And, example of that, Taylor mentioned environmental policies being dictated from places where people don't live. If you look at Colorado recently just passed a statewide ballot amendment to reintroduce wolves in Colorado. Look, reintroducing wolves is fine, but rural folks absorb the cost. They bear the cost of wolf reintroduction, and the city folks are the ones who vote to have the wolves come back. And there's a disconnect there. Like, we need to find ways to connect that because the urban folks aren't bearing that cost. I also think when you think about private land stewardship, there's something that I call invisible conservation that happens out there. We tend to think of conservation only in terms of the public land that you see here, or if land gets enrolled in a conservation easement where it's permanently protected by law, or if land gets enrolled in a government program, join the Farm Bill or something like that. But there are hundreds of millions of acres that ranchers and farmers are managing for conservation every day, and they don't get recognized. And if we ignore this invisible conservation that's occurring in America, we do it at our own peril. They're not asking for a government program. They're not asking for an easement. They're not asking to have the government buy their land. They're just doing the right thing. And we got to prop them up and keep them doing that. So, some examples of what we're doing with private land in Paradise Valley, for example, is Paradise Valley is a big place for elk migration corridors. There's all kinds of new mapping that relates to radio collaring and remote sensing. They can tell you where the paths of elk are going. And what we're finding out is in the winter, the elk head down to private land. They're not dumb. They're not staying up in the mountains. And private land was the first settled land. It was the land near the water, the best water sources, the best forage. That's what elk like too. It's a pretty cool thing. And but elk has a huge cost on ranchers. Forage, fencing, crop damage. They bring a disease called brucellosis that if you're a cattle rancher and brucellosis is transmitted to your cattle from elk, it will cause the cattle to abort. If you're a cow calf operation that sells cows, pounds of cows, you're in trouble. You can go into quarantine. So PERC is looking at things like market-based tools, like how can we lower the risk? Who's the market? The market for elk or Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and tourists and environmentalists and conservationists. So we'll go out, for example, and we'll raise a fund, private fund, that if a rancher in Paradise Valley were to contract brucellosis on his or her ranch, we'll pay out like 70 to 80% of the cost of quarantine. Those ranchers, that's an economic decision. Those ranchers like, I can keep my ranch intact. I don't have to sell to the development if I have a devastating disease that's transmitted by wildlife. And that's the way we're going to keep wildlife habitat. That's the way we're going to keep these private lands intact, are to turn these costs into less of a liability or into an asset at the end of the day. So that's my spiel on private land. If you want me to get anything else yet.
Thank you, Brian. No, that's wonderful. Like I say, we work with a number of conservation organizations, and the philosophy around the capitalism and that approach really is a fascinating approach, and we appreciate the effort you're making on it. I want to come back to the public lands and the wild horses in a moment, but before we do, I want to skip over to Jose for a second. Most of you know Jose, and we're grateful to have Jose here within the Bronze Buffalo family. And for those that do not, Jose is a 10th generation Spaniard master horseman. Jose's 10th great grandfather was the master horseman for the Spanish crown that was partly responsible for bringing what is now known as the wild horse or the Mustang to the Americas. They were deeded 200,000 acres in present day Guatemala, where Jose grew up, and where his father and now Jose has a piece of that original homestead. Here a couple of years back, Jose and our organization had the opportunity to go over to the wild horse facility in Rock Springs, Wyoming, and pick up some wild horses. And in the process, Jose was able to go hand pick the horses that he was going to save out of the wild horse pen. And anybody that knows Jose, he couldn't go for the young horses that were breakable. He had to pick the ones that the BLM had deemed as unsavable. Those were the ones that he chose to bring to the ranch for the first time. Her name was Jose's girlfriend, is how he named her. The big
She
mare.
gotta be stubborn.
The BLM made it clear that horse would not be a horse that would ever be ridden. Therefore, he probably shouldn't choose it. And what I love about Jose is when the BLM came to check on their horses in our facility to do their walkthrough, and it was what was it, Jose? Maybe 7 days later.
A week later.
A week later.
Correct me if I'm wrong. About 10 days later, somewhere around.
This director of the BLM came in and he said, "Show us where our babies are." And Jose was sitting on that baby, and they were blown away. They did not believe it. Jose, when we first met Jose, and I want to talk to you a little bit about this. We were in the process. Bronze Buffalo Club companies had begun to run some large leadership groups through our club members and their organizations through a business / equestrian leadership program. And we were finding that we were having phenomenal success with the outcomes of that. Cody, my brother, who really, Jose has told me on countless occasions, and not to embarrass Cody, but he's told me that Cody's been the best student that he's ever ridden with and trained with. Since we were young boys, our rite of passage was to break a horse when we were young. Cody, how old were we when when we got those two colts, Nikki and Shadow. So Cody was in third grade, I was in fifth grade, and these were catch colts, of course, because we didn't get paid. So we got a couple of illegitimate children off of a mare, and we were asked to break those horses. And we learned a process. Cody went a little bit deeper in high school and started to study and try to understand the teachings of the Spanish horseman. And it wasn't terribly well received by the cowboys within our community. After we went through a large number of leadership retreats, thanks to Mark and Deanne, which we were very grateful for and still are. We were talking one day, and we were doing an audit of our core competencies within our organization. And we said to each other, there's got to be an unadulterated, pure Spaniard somewhere in the world that is still connected to that heritage. And what would it be like if we were able to bring him within the organization, or her, which we now have both, thanks to Jose and his family. What if we were able to bring that sort of a factor here? And we immediately began to do research to understand where that might exist. We were flying out to Augusta with one of our club members who was telling us about this fascinating individual within a couple of days of us making that declaration. And he was telling a story about this horseman from Spain that had started the King of Dubai's colts that were pedigreed for, on paper, for 3,000 years. They were clones, and the colts were too spoiled, and so they had to find this Spaniard. And we landed on the ground, and I got on my phone and I called Cody and I said, I think I found our guy. Now it's your job to get him here. And so we're very grateful to have Jose here. Watching Jose within the days that he arrived at the ranch to demonstrate his talent. He started horses that, frankly, you could pay me as much money as Scott Keller has, and it's quite a bit. And I wouldn't get on the back of that horse. I would not get on the back of that horse. And I asked Jose, I said, Jose, why is it that you would risk your life to get on that horse? Because I'm telling you right now, if you're doing the risk to reward thing monetarily, you're in the wrong place. We're not going to be able to pay you the kind of money that I think you deserve to do that. And I'll never forget what Jose said to me. He said, and Cody was sitting there, he said, Justin, Cody, I would die for any one horse. They're all worth saving. And as we jumped into saving the horses, we started to talk to Jose, and by the time we were finished, we felt like kindergartners, because we said, Jose, are you familiar with the Mustang makeover? Are you familiar with some of the media and the things that are out there and that exist? Because there's some really good programs. And Jose said, man, if we're going to help, we got to help. They save maybe 150 horses a year. Now, this isn't a competition, because the wonderful thing is they're saving them, and there's recognition into the marketplace. But I'm going to ask Jose to talk a little bit about a concept. If you teach a man to fish, overfeeding the man a fish, right? The whole principle. Jose talked to me a little bit about something that was missing, and it was around what he called the horsemanship gap. Would you take a minute and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, a bunch of years ago, I was working in Guadalajara, Mexico, a bunch of jumpers from La Silla, LS, well known as the top breeders on earth. And I met Linda Allen. And we started to talk about the gap, in the equine industry, especially in the competition world. There's a huge gap that we are missing. Why? Because everybody wants to go around the bush and BS everybody. And in horses, there's an esoteric side that everybody can jump in and just BS, it's the spiritual side, which I hate, because it is true then, but there's a lot of people just talking trash about it. So the missing gap is the young horse trainers. In the Western world, there's a lot of colt starters. They're used to start quarter horses. Quarter horses are very easy to start. But the equine industry, where the money rolls, is on the sport side of the industry, So that's where the circles of energy on the horses are different. And I'll tell the cowboys, say, hey guys, we need to fix this, that missing gap, because that's where we're creating, that's where the problem is. So we wanted to bring more horsemen, real horsemen, not BS, real horsemen, made through or by Mustangs, but by difficult horses, not by just horses that are almost born broke, and that's the missing gap. One of the really missing gaps we wanted to fix,
Thank you, Jose. And to address that, we've created a little bit of a school that we're just launching. We've got in Afton some housing there, and we're going to launch our first horsemanship school where we'll bring in horsemen and young colt starters and things from around the country who have the passion, they have the desire, and now give them the opportunity and the ability when they go back to where they're at, to put the cues and the gap from the heritage and the legacy that the Alejos family has built over centuries. And we believe that that's a real generational effect long-term for horses. And we're grateful for Jose's insights. Brian, before we open up some of the Q&A, because I know there was several folks that had some questions for both Jose and yourself, I wanted to visit just a little bit about maybe the framework around the problem here in America with, as it relates to public lands, because that's a big issue. We had a close friend of Scott Keller's here last year, Governor Herbert, who is the past governor of Utah. I know that I've visited with a good friend of John Cushman's, Matt Mead from over the hill. A lot of the Western governors struggle with the public lands issue on a variety of fronts, but the American Mustang being the front of those issues. And so talk to us, maybe give us some framework around that.
Yeah, this is a real important issue here. I don't know how many of y'all were here last year, and I'll take a little liberty with permission from Ryan and James Shields sitting in the back there. But last year's flag ceremony where all the horses came out and did the lap last year included a celebrity. It was one of the unbreakable wild Mustangs that Jose worked with to train, named Aslan. And Aslan was a 3-year-old filly that was out on the public land, out on the range. She got beat up pretty bad by her herd. She had scars all over her and everything. And here she is in just this amazing home with some amazing parents, so to speak, taking care of her. And we need more of that. That's what we need. But what we have right now on our public land, our federal land in particular, is a little bit of crisis with this uniquely symbolic American animal, the wild Mustang. We actually have too many Mustangs out there on public land right now. So there's about 27 million acres of land that's managed by the BLM. And by the way, that's Bureau of Land Management, for those who are thinking. And that's across the West in 11 states. And the Bureau of Land Management manages in these horse management areas. That's kind of the units they set up for these horses so that they can do well and they can be healthy. They have something that they call the appropriate management level. So if you're a wildlife biologist, you call this carrying capacity. How much forage is on the land there, how much water there is to sustain these horses so they don't starve or they don't die of thirst. And over that 27 million acres, the scientists believe it can hold 27,000 horses. We have 82,000 horses on those lands right now, 3 times what can sustain the horses. Of the 177 horse herds managed by the Bureau, 37 are at the carrying capacity, but 140 are overpopulated right now. So this is a challenge. Horses, for those who are these guys, horses are prolific breeders. Their population can double every 5 years. If you do nothing to these lands and these horses, that's going to be 16,000 horses, every year. They have no natural predators. They're long lived. And we want to have horses that are healthy and not starving and not this tragic story. So, and the problem's even worse than what we think it is, because it's just not the It's just not those 82,000 horses. That's just on Bureau of Land Management. There's about 350,000 wild horses that are out on state lands, tribal lands, other federal lands. So what does this mean? We do have horses in places like Nevada and Utah that are starving, can't find water holes, can't get the appropriate forage. There's damage to grasslands and water sources. When horses do find homes or holes, watering holes, they'll guard those jealously, and they'll push out species like pronghorn antelope or sage grouse that need those as well. They can chew down the native grass pretty heavily, which opens the door for invasives like cheatgrass, which is super flammable. We have about 100 million acres of cheatgrass, which is a nasty stuff across the West. So we're looking at imperiled horses on imperiled landscapes, and that's what we're trying to fix here. One of the things that the Bureau of Land Management does is they go into these horse populations, they're overpopulated, and they'll actually round them up to try to take some surplus out of those herds. And they'll do that, and then they'll leave the herd alone for 4 years, and we know the population doubles, so they'll come back and they'll do it again. So we have 82,000 horses on Bureau of Land Management lands. We actually have 40,000 horses that are held in holding pens and corrals and pastures to live out their lives unless they're adopted. That actually costs $52 million a year to the taxpayers. About 2/3 of the federal horse budget goes to these holding pens and corrals. That's if a horse stays there for its entire life, that's $24,000 that the government and taxpayers are spending on it. So that's your Paul Ryan moment right there. And so when we look at this, there are really like 3 solutions to try to address this situation with the horses. The one is the solution that nobody wants. There are meat markets out there in Europe and Asia, and that's not palatable. It might be, an economist can make the case that's a good economic solution, that's one way to take the surplus down. Fertility treatments are a big thing that folks are using with horses right now. So there's a vaccine out there that forestalls ovulation, and it can do it for a year. There's one vaccine that does it for a year. There's another that does it for like 3 to 5 years. But it's tough. You got to round those horses up. You got to administer the vaccine. You've got to do a booster. Sometimes they go out and dart. They're actually these little ladies. I was talking to folks at the Department of Interior, these little ladies who love horses who have volunteered to go out with these dart guns and track these horses down and dart them and pay for it. Like, hey, we'll pay to go dart the horses. But horses are very skittish. Like, they're not going to sit around and let you like come and shoot them in the backside.
Mom, we've got your new gig.
But the other thing, which is really cool, is adoption, to find them good homes. I mean, that is a really cool solution. And the BLM does 67 adoption events a year. They will sell the horse untrained for $25 fee. If the horse is trained, they might charge $125. Some horses that are really well trained, like if Jose's trained, there might be actually a competitive bid on that. And some horses are given to law enforcement as well. But there are very few adoptions that occur each year. Only about 3,000 horses are adopted each year, because the horses are expensive. You got to transport them, you got to feed them, you got veterinary care, there's training involved with these particular horses. So one of the cool things and how I got involved with these guys is we had economists that were looking at this problem, like, put the problem in front of these folks and think about how we can encourage more people to adopt horses. And the solution of the economists was pretty simple: pay the people. Why are we charging people to adopt horses? We ought to be paying an adoption stipend. And the figure was something like $1,000. And if you think about it, if that horse is in federal captivity for its lifetime, it's $24,000. For the price of $1,000, you've just saved enormous amount of money, and you found the horse a really good home at the end of the day. So in 2019, the administration implemented a $1,000 incentive program. They would pay $500 after the first 60 days to make sure the horse was in good condition, $500 at the time the horse title transferred, which is like 12 to 16 months down the line. They were doing inspections of these horses to make sure they were being cared for. The first year, this is the good news part, saw a 91% increase in horse adoptions in America. Over 6,000 horses were adopted, and there was a savings to taxpayers, if you're a fiscal conservative, $171 million. In the last 3 years, there's been a 230% increase in adoptions. There are about 8,600 horses that were adopted last year, which was the most since 1997. the most horses that were adopted since then. This little stipend, is incentivizing these horse adoptions. And this is actually the first time in 15 years that we've now seen two consecutive years of declining horse population on the wild range there. So, this is a very emotional issue. You've got a lot of advocacy groups involved. There are groups that are taking this adoption program to court and challenging it, because there are groups who just think you shouldn't touch horses. Like, just let horses be horses. They starve, whatever, they want to close their eyes that horses are starving or dying of dehydration. So they're taken to court. This will be litigated ultimately, but and there are very few advocates for this out there. You've got folks who love horses who just don't want horses touched. You're looking at the guys who are for adoption and adoption incentives. So I would encourage folks to weigh in with their representatives.
Thank you, Brian. Very insightful and a great landscape of where we're at currently. We're going to jump to some audience questions. We're going to do two things as we do that. Number one, Jose, I want to ask you a little bit about finding purpose for these horses. Jose's got another girlfriend, I'll call her. Or, is that a mare that you're riding up on Lou's Ranch?
Gotta be mean.
Yeah. Who, after watching him on this horrific bucker, I asked Jose, why do you keep a horse like that around that's dangerous? And Jose said she just hasn't found her purpose. And I want him to talk a little bit about helping his horses find their purpose, because it's fascinating. And then we'll jump to the audience. Excuse me. And when we do that, I'd like if Jen Castellini and Ryan Shields, I'm putting them on the spot, would just take a minute each to share their experience with their horses that they've saved within the Bronze Buffalo and that have added to the family. That would be fantastic. So Jose, talk to us a little bit about finding purpose.
Yeah, we have over 70 horses with us now, and at least half of them, we were their last chance. Even vets said to put them down, they were dangerous, and they were. And they hurt a lot of people, a lot of trainers, and but it was nobody's fault but the horse, And I have never ridden a horse with problems. They have human problems. They don't have horse problems. So the problem is that me growing up with Arabians and war horses, Spaniard horses, they're so smart. So the tendency is that they outsmart the trainers, especially modern trainers. Modern trainers don't know much about horses if you go deep into the subject. So what I did with this horses is it's about leadership. They're buckers, they're mean horses, they are angry with the human. And if I were a horse, I'd buck my skin off before an idiot gets on my back. And so what I did is try to find a purpose for those horses. And, the Arabian side came here to start. The very first time I was here, actually, Jan is riding one of them. And we gave them another chance, but they have to understand that there's some rules. And they got to pay if they want to break the rules they already used to break. So it's pretty much like straightening up a problem kid or a juvenile delinquent, same thing. You got to be straight and say this, honest, just, but firm. In modern days, it's not politically correct to say what I say, but that's how it is. In horses, I think it was the same thing. That horse that you watch bucking, she didn't want me on her back. It's a lot easier for a horse to say, you know what, I'm going to buck a little bit. I'm going to put you on the ground, and then you're going to put me back in the stall, and I can have a very nice life. No. You domesticate horse, you have to give me an hour a day because I am providing for everything you have. I am working my butt off to have you so nice, so pampered, so well taken care of. You give me an hour a day. This is a deal, That's what I want people to think. Oh, my horse is a problem. Yeah, it's a problem, of course, but we got to find the problem and get the solution. Because there's a lot of horses that we can work. And, like we talk about, with Mustangs, we can put Mustangs pretty much everywhere. Mustangs are an awesome horses. They're not as pretty as domesticated horses and modern horses, but they can do the job with security, police. They can do a lot of jobs that we can help them to. So a problem horse is not a problem horse until you really understand that they can be fixed. And problem horses are like problem kids. Most of the time, they're the most intelligent ones. If you give them a chance and a direction, they will be a lot better than the rest.
Thank you, Jose. Jen, if we can give you a minute and then jump to Ryan, and then we'd like to open up the questions of the audience for the next 5 to 10 minutes and wrap up another wonderful Rocky Mountain Economic Summit.
I'm going to do my best to not ugly cry. But I would like to start by just saying thank you. It is really the privilege of a lifetime to get to ride a horse that's been cared for and learned from the Alejos and Hyde families. And it's, I mean, I don't even know how I got here. Like, I'm, as a rider, not equal to like polishing the boots. But I think that Princess Lava Rock, my chestnut Arabian mare, can feel the sincerity of my love for her. And she's gonna give me a lot of time to catch up to them, which I will never catch up to them. But I'm all in for the advocacy of this exquisitely special animal and all of her fellow horses. And just am here with all my presence to help any way I can.
Thank you, Jen.
My name is Ryan, and I have had the privilege of being able to learn from Jose and his family. I do have a story and a testimony to back up my experience, but we don't have time for that right now, so that's another time. I will tell you that the first time I ever came here, I had an amazing experience with Cody and Miss Nips, who hopefully y'all have met. She's a healing horse. There's no mistake about that. We actually did it in the meadow. We had dinner the other night. So a couple days before we had dinner, I went and sat there for the very first time since that experience happened to me. And I was able to reflect on the person I am now compared to the person I was then. And the story goes, at the end, I was crying and didn't know Cody for 24 hours and said, "We're gonna find you a horse." And I said, "Okay, great." 3 months later, I'm watching Narnia with my daughter Camden, and I get a text from Cody Hyde with a beautiful photograph of 4 Mustangs. He said, "Pick one." So I put a heart around the paint. He goes, "That's not your horse." And I said, "Okay, who's my horse?" And he said, "This one." She was all dirty and beaten up, like Brian said. Hair was kind of mangy. And I came here and I met her, not knowing what to expect. And honestly, it was love at first sight. Sometimes I feel like we make that up in our head, how much a horse understands you and understands you from the minute he smells you. And I didn't even know really what I was about to step into when Jose said, "Okay, go ahead and get on her." All right, get on her, take 3 deep breaths. So I did that. And I immediately started to feel calm, and I settled into her. And we rode around the arena, and I kept it real short, about 8 minutes, because I didn't want to overstay my welcome. And after that, Jose said, "Do you know what you just did?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "I've only ridden her 3 times, and she's from the wild. And if you told any cowboy that, he wouldn't believe you." I walked out of there about 3 inches taller. I felt really good about what I had done, and I had a new respect for these animals. And I will have to say the Mustangs do hold a special place in my heart. So I'm very honored to be riding one. And I thank you all for getting me.
Thank you, Ryan. We'll spend the next few minutes and open it up to questions. Zoe.
I'm not the best public speaker, so I'm gonna give it my best shot. But I have a question about private land use. So I grew up, for you guys who don't know, I grew up in a small town called Aspen, Colorado. And I spent my childhood up in this valley called Hunter Creek Valley, riding horses in the summer, cross-country skiing, hiking. It was my playground. And my girlfriend, and who I'm still friends with today, her father, she lived in a teepee, grew up in a teepee, and her father had gotten 2 or 3 mining claims. He went back into the 1860s and got these mining claims. And that was the property that I grew up playing on. Then Aspen blew up, real estate went crazy, and somebody bought this property. And all of a sudden, literally from one day to the next, this playground that I'd grown up on, fenced, couldn't walk through it. I grew up with all, learning about nature and how you had to protect it and everything. And so I have now to this day, it's fenced off and I have to walk around my playground. And so to me, it's like, how can we come up with a partnership whereby I understand you guys are wonderful stewards, but at the same time, everything is getting fenced off and it's left for a select few people. So that's my.
I'll take it. I mean, Zoe, you've hit on the old West, new West tension that is occurring out here today. We see this in Montana as well. A lot of folks, Taylor had a great statement about sort of customs and cultures of where you're moving to and learning to appreciate those and do a better job of appreciating those. We have, sort of our big private land stewards right now are either these ranches or farms, or they're what we call amenity ranches, where people are coming in from out of town and they're buying big, large parcels, consolidating big, large parcels and putting fences up. And, where the cowboy code was a handshake and that would get you on the land to hunt or to play, doesn't work anymore. The question is, what does it mean for conservation at the end of the day? You could have, the challenge is some of these amenity ranches are managed very well for conservation. I mean, they're managed to be fisheries or wildlife, and it's not being managed for cattle. But how you interact with the community, how you mesh with the community matters. And there's a hope that those of you who grew up in the area, there's a chance to help educate landowners and in a way to help them see that, look, it's not black and white. But it's hard. I have a hard time, if somebody comes in and buys a whole lot of property and isn't developing it, but is treating it very well for wildlife and I'm a property rights guy, it stinks that you can't go in there. It stinks that the fence is there. But in some cases there's an upside to that as well.
Justin, Jose, the work you're doing with the Bronze Buffalo Foundation, frankly, is unsung, and I appreciate that you're finally bringing it to light. There's a tremendous emotional and financial investment in this mission, and your mission of saving horses and changing lives is very real because we've lived it. I've watched the transformation of my wife and the confidence that she's garnered from being paired with this horse. I'm now number 2, the Princess Lava. To that end, and Justin, we've spoken about this, and Jose as well. I wanted to just suggest, because I know this is a passion of yours, that this passion be extended to the membership and be member driven for those that are interested. I know the Shields are in alignment with us in wanting to build out the foundation, its awareness, and help financially support your endeavors. It's hard for you all to do that with your members, and I think it should be member driven, and just wanted you to share your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Bob. We welcome it and we're grateful for it. We've invested a lot of time and energy and money into it, and will continue to do so with or without others, because it's truly our our passion and we believe that it's an opportunity for all of us to drive something together forward. And Bob, we're grateful for your comment and would welcome that opportunity to lock arms and see what we might be able to do together. So thank you.
If you don't mind my sharing the real expense behind this, because it's real.
I don't think you have to tell Scott. He
Yeah.
might know.
But as I understand, it's about $1 million a year to do the good work you're doing with these horses.
Yeah, I think we spend close to 2.15,
1.8.
1.8. Yeah.
And to that end, would love to work offline and create more awareness and certainly separate fundraising around that. So
Thank you, Bob. That's very gracious. Shane.
Well, thank you guys for spending the afternoon with us. It's a fascinating topic and I really enjoy it. I can say that Winston Churchill said the outside of a horse is good for the inside of a man. And when I met these guys, I've been a member here at the Bronze Buffalo Club about 10 years. And I hadn't really been on a horse before, even though I grew up in farming country in Iowa. And call it serendipity or God's will. I fell into playing polo with my little girls who were 8 and 10 at the time. And I was a terrible rider and they heckled me all the time and you can call it half ego or half inspiration, but I really tried to make myself the best player I could possibly be. The last 10 years being on horses with my kids, and I will tell you, if you rewind the clock, call it 120 years, all of us are descendants of horsemen. Before cars, you either stayed in your village or you dealt with horses to get from point A to point B. So I think it's an important thing to remember for families. Through the last 10 years, my polo experience with my girls has been incredible. Jose's been part of that subculture for quite some time and knows everything about horses. My wife, Erin, got into the whole scene and is an incredible player herself. And so my question to you is if a family here wants to get involved in involving horses in their family, what's the process? And do you take care of the horses up here and they visit them, or how does that exactly work? That's my question.
Jose, do you want to speak to that? Would you like me to? So that's a great question, Shane. And for us, we welcome the opportunity to invite families to participate. We take care of the horse. We keep the horse on the ranch if that's what you're looking to do. But more importantly, provide the opportunities and the experiences to come together as a family and really share in moments that you may connect on a different level with not only your horse, but with your family member. And so we invite you to get with Cody and Lexi, with Jose, and would love to share in that experience with you and your family. So can everybody please join with me? Do we have one last question? We'll get one last question here with Jim.
Hey, Justin. Could you just give a little background on the foundation? I don't really know much about it. And maybe the rest of the audience might appreciate just hearing about it so we can
Absolutely
digest that and think about it and then get back to you.
You bet. Thank you, Jim. So a little over 10 years ago, with the Bronze Buffalo Club, we created the Bronze Buffalo Foundation. And the reason we created the Bronze Buffalo Foundation 10 years ago, or a little longer than that maybe now, is we had a number of club members who had spoken to us about donating to a foundation, but not having their names put out in the marketplace, and then ask us to help provide funds for different foundations that they supported. So we set up what's called a donor advisory fund, and that was the genesis of the Bronze Buffalo Foundation. Here over the last 6 to 7 months, we have, through the good work of Chad here in the back, created our own 501c3 so that we could really get serious about our mission and purpose to continue to change lives and save horses and maybe to share in with others in that experience and opportunity. And so the creation of the actual 501c3 for this purpose is, Jim, pretty new. And the idea behind that is, and I won't share names. We just recently had a birthday party out here with some of Cody's friends, some new referrals to the club membership, actually through Lee Perkins as well. The gentleman was the chairman of Churchill Downs. They had the opportunity to go experience and share with Jose down at the ranch. We've received some recent track horses that families have invested a lot of emotional and financial capital into. And there's not a lot of places around the world that has the sort of emotional influence that Jose and the team has. And so most of the horses that you see out here on property today that are being ridden are new family members that have come from tough circumstances, and this was their last stop. And so as part of that, we were speaking with the general and the astronaut that you were also generously participated in with yesterday financially, which we're incredibly grateful for. They've approached us and said, what can we do from a horseback standpoint? What could we do with working with these horses? And we've had a lot of opportunity and crossover over the years without getting really serious about it, Jim. And so because of the outcomes that we're seeing, we decided to get serious about that. And so that's a little bit about the foundation, if that makes sense. Can everybody please join in with me and give Brian and Jose a round of applause for their